Chronopunk, a novel, episode 9. There's three things in this episode that are important to me. I want to start with the dichotomy between the professional life and the artistic life that is depicted here in the persona of Deborah Fiddler. Deborah Fiddler is a crucial character in this novel, therefore she's being introduced more thoroughly in this episode and the episode before. We spoke about her childhood. Now we're introducing a rather unusual twist, but a very important twist for this novel, which is she is not just one of the most successful, finance lawyers and goes after crooks and things like that. She's also a very successful DJ. We're introducing house music and the history of house music and techno in the Midwest, and her coming from Austria, actually Slovenia, Austria. She's half Slovenian, half Austrian. Coming to this place in the 1990s, when house music and techno was sort of at its almost decline from the peak. So we went through a sort of an arc back in the 70s when it started, and then grew to prominence in the clubs and undergrounds, and then became a world phenomena, maybe somewhat in the late 80s, early 90s. Ibiza and then Berlin and all that, particularly in Europe, and then sort of declined again. So there's the story of that, and her being a prominent figure in that field, and also a very prominent figure in the law field. So that is law and finance. She has a PhD in finance and law, University of Chicago and Princeton and things like that. So she's really well decorated, and she's chosen for this project by by Control Center, by Lisa Chu. In 2016, she identifies Deborah Fiddler as the contact for Moody. So Moody contacts her, and I think this dichotomy, this is interesting for several reasons. I would say one is, we're talking about trajectories here, right? We're talking about different possibilities that time can have, because we can change the past to influence the present. And therefore, it's not inconceivable to also think of parallel trajectories. And what does it actually mean to be a person, right? We identify people often with their job, or even worse, with their race or nationality. And as absurd as that is, we still keep doing it today in 2025. When in reality, people are a lot more faceted than that. And I think this comes across in many characters, particularly Deborah Fiddler. I mean, we introduced Atifa Benkader just in I think 1 or 2 episodes before. She is a senator, and she used to be a tripop queen. And then we had Simbi, a drug dealer, but also sort of grown up in the music. Well, actually, Simbi is more of a one-dimensional person, but Munir, Moody, and Lisa, they're all multifaceted people. And the dichotomy between professional life and artistic life, I think that's a big theme. So that's one thing. I think the other thing that is really important in this episode, and this is one of those episodes again that I think a lot of meat is being put around the bone here. It's the question of what actually do we mean with future generations, and how do we justify future generations to be protected in court today? And the answer is we go back in history, and we actually follow the law. And the Habeas Corpus Act that was introduced way back in the Middle Ages, but then enshrined in English law in the 17th century, and also taken over by the Founding Fathers and put into the Constitution. The Habeas Corpus Act, the details are in the episode in terms of what it actually means, but it means something along the lines that your body cannot be possessed or nationalized by the government unless some national security thing happens. So really, you are protected under the Constitution. Things like, you have the right to remain silent, and all of that stuff is a derivative from that. The difference between what we call third world countries and our country is that you can't just be stopped by police and arrested. You have rights, things like that. You can't be just taken away your property, all of those things, right? And the question that Deborah in a meeting comes up with is, okay, how do we the lawsuit that they're preparing, right? They're preparing a lawsuit here, which is they're anticipating quantitative easing that will start in 2008. It's 2006 now, so they're preparing this. For some reason, Deborah bought into the idea that Moody's from the future and that he knows what's going to happen and things like that. And we're not going into details of why that's even the case and why would somebody believe somebody else and things like that. Let's leave that alone. Let's say Deborah likes the idea. She prepares the lawsuit and she's asking a fundamental question, which is, what am I going to tell the jury in terms of, okay, what exactly who are we protecting? What is the future? And the question is, well, the future is really connected to our knowledge, at least today, through DNA, right? There is a connection between me and my son, and that is the DNA. I mean, that's at least scientifically proven. There's probably other connections, emotional connections, and I might have some connections with my ancestry way back, even people that I've never met. But from what we know and what we can prove scientifically is that there's a connection in DNA. So what Deborah is making here, the case is that, well, the body is just a continuation of DNA. And there's really, we're not really different bodies. We're just a continuation of different instantiation of the same thing, which is DNA. And therefore, we cannot confiscate property of future generations. So confiscating property of future generations is akin to confiscating property of present generations, and therefore, violates, I think it's Article 9 in the Constitution. So this is the key argument, which I want to let this sink in for a second, right? So what we're doing here in this novel is, it is a little bit of lawyerish, or English, whatever the word is. Like, we're trying to put a court case situation into the narrative. Now, I have to admit, I didn't do a lot of research in terms of actual law, things like that, but I think it's also not necessary because this has never been done before. So it's not like I can go back in the archives. But what has been done before is, I think people have made cases to protect non-human or let's call it non-obvious objects, such as, for example, people want to give the environment rights, or they want to give you animal rights, right? There is a thing called animal rights. And in that sense, we can say, well, if animals have rights and forests have rights, why shouldn't future generations have rights too, right? They're kind of impersonal things that can't talk right now, things that can't protect themselves, defend themselves, things that can't be put in jail or freed from jail, but they have rights. And I think when it comes to future generations, very similar to environmental issues, maybe today we don't see directly how they're being affected, or we just don't want to see it, but obviously we do affect them. If we pile on 40 trillion of debt, which is what we have right now, that is going to have to be paid back one way or the other by future generations, whether it's through money or through war. And therefore, we are confiscating property that is it's not lawful. We shouldn't be doing this, and that's the case. So I think that's really important. And just to tie it back to the first point that I made in this episode, and we have different trajectories, right? We have different personalities, and that complicates the situation, right? What is actually Deborah Fiedler? Well, who is she? Well, she's two different people, but no, she is not. She's only one person. But in this particular novel, we know that we can potentially go back and change her present too by just changing the past. We can go back and have her not become a DJ, and then she will not have that kind of trajectory that she actually has. So these are interesting points. I think we spoke about this also in a previous episode, how politics becomes now spiritual, because we can really change trajectories to the point where we can have kind of unlimited outcomes, and therefore politics becomes the science of understanding trajectories and manipulating the past in such ways that any kind of present is possible, which is a kind of a spiritual thing. So to summarize, this episode is really focused on two things. It's the character of Deborah, which is definitely depicted as a dichotomous persona. She has a very strong academic record, and then she also is a pretty famous DJ. She spends time in Ibiza, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of that kind of dichotomy being shown in this novel. This Deborah is just the latest instantiation, and then we have this really important passage where they define what it actually means to be future generation. Maybe just before I end this episode, I just want to mention again, make a little marketing pitch here for the book. It's really important, in my opinion, to embed this in an interesting narrative. There's some sex here. There's some action. We had some even murder and drug cartels before. So this is I would say this is entertaining. Let's just leave it at that, whatever that means. But I want to say a couple of things here. When it comes to narratives, I think the best outcome is usually the most entertaining outcome, and this applies to narratives as much as it applies to actually real world scenarios and things along those lines. And what I mean with entertaining, entertaining can be understood in several ways, but I think another word for that is engaging. Right, you're engaging. So the best outcomes are the most engaging outcomes, and that's where the notion there's no such thing as bad press, for example, comes from. Right, as long as it's engaging, it's a good thing. And then you have the lovers and the haters, and there's a thin line between love and hate. Actually, love and hate is the same thing. Indifference is the worst, etc. So all these things fit, and I think it's important. I don't want to diminish the fact that my character here is a DJ in a house music context. I'm just reading a novel where they talk about classical music, and that's something maybe that is more palatable for the literary cabal to say, well, yeah, if you dissect the difference between Rachmaninoff, Shostakovich, Prokofiev, if you look for a lineage like that, that is more palatable to the literary cabal. And if you do the same thing for house music and you depict a lineage between several DJs or music styles, or you try to find the commonalities between Detroit and Chicago and what happened in Europe later on, that's somehow not worth it. And I think that's total nonsense. And I'm not saying that the literary cabal is totally refusing that, but there's certainly an elitist approach towards things along those lines, or art in general. I think modern art and people like Warhol have tried to break that ice, and then to some extent they've done it, and some extent maybe even went too far. When you put detergent in a museum and call it art, maybe that's too much. But I don't want to go down that route now. All I want to say is that I think, again, what we're focusing on here with Chronopunk is, first and foremost, it has to be an important story to tell. And then that story needs to be put on a pedestal, and somehow it has to be made important. And I think the best way to make something important is to make it engaging, so people pay attention, because attention is the currency that we all struggle with. That's the one thing we're short of, no matter how much money we print, and no matter how many robots we build, and no matter how much abundance we have. The one thing we don't have in abundance is actually attention, and it's important to bring that across, I think. And I just want to do this in this episode. Again, this is not the first time that we're introducing a character in Chronopunk that has dichotomies and edges and hopefully engaging character traits. But I think Deborah Fiedler is a very good example to put that point across. Thank you.